The Brics nations, along with other countries from the global south, have expressed their dissatisfaction with the United Nations UN for several reasons. Primarily, they believe that Western nations dominate key international institutions and decision-making processes, resulting in a system that does not adequately represent their interest and influence. This has led to numerous suggestions for significant reforms or even a complete overhaul of the UN to create a more balanced and representative global governance system. Issues of representation and influence. Brics nations argue that global governance structures like the UN, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund (IMF) are predominantly controlled by Western powers. These emerging economies and developing countries feel that their rapid economic growth and increasing geopolitical importance are not reflected in the policies and governance of these institutions. Perceived bias and double standards. A common perception among Brics countries is that the UN and other international bodies are biased toward Western nations. This bias is particularly evident in human rights issues, where countries like China and Russia face frequent criticism, while similar issues in Western countries are often overlooked. This perceived double standard contributes to a growing sense of distrust and dissatisfaction with the UN. Economic conditions and sovereignty. Countries from the global south, including Brics members, argue that Western-led institutions impose stringent conditions on financial assistance and development aid, which can hinder their economic growth and infringe on their sovereignty. They claim these conditions often favor Western economic and political interest rather than addressing the actual developmental needs of recipient countries. Geopolitical rivalries and adversarial stances. Brics nations contend that the current global financial and political systems, including the UN, the World Bank, and the IMF, are skewed in favor of Western countries. These institutions are seen as not adequately addressing the interest of emerging economies and developing countries, despite their growing economic clout. Geopolitical rivalries, such as those involving Russia and China, exacerbate the situation. Actions taken by Western countries, such as sanctions or political pressure, are perceived as attempts to curb the influence of Brics nations on the global stage, contributing to dissatisfaction with international institutions. Advocacy for a multipolar world order. Brics nations are advocating for a more multipolar world order, where their interests and contributions are better acknowledged and respected. They are working to establish parallel institutions and mechanisms to reduce their dependency on Western-led financial systems. This includes the creation of the new development bank and discussions about a Brics as currency to challenge the dominance of the US dollar in international trade. The expansion of Brics to include countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia is part of a broader strategy to increase their collective influence on the global stage, accounting for a significant share of the world's GDP and population. The UN's history and structure. The UN, established in 1945, aims to promote global peace and security in response to the horrors of World War II and to address the failures of the League of Nations. It provides a platform for nations to discuss and resolve global problems together. The UN has two main bodies, the General Assembly and the Security Council. The General Assembly is a democratic forum where every member country has one vote, addressing a wide range of issues, including security, budgets, and overseeing UN operations. Although its resolutions are mostly non-binding, it can act on peace and security if the Security Council fails to do so under the Uniting for Peace resolution. The Security Council, with 15 members, includes 5 permanent ones: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia, who have veto power. This setup ensures that these key countries can protect their strategic interest, but has been criticized for reducing the Council's effectiveness, especially when permanent members use their veto to block actions. Criticisms and calls for reform. The veto power held by the Security Council's permanent members often leads to a deadlock, prioritizing the interest of a few powerful nations over the wider global good. The effectiveness of the UN's main bodies is frequently criticized. The General Assembly, representing all member nations, struggles to influence significant global actions due to its non-binding resolutions. Meanwhile, the Security Council, capable of making binding decisions, is often hindered by geopolitical tensions among its permanent members. Despite these issues, UN specialized agencies like the World Health Organization and UNESCO play vital roles in addressing global health, education, and cultural preservation. However, the Security Council's failure to adapt to changing global dynamics has significantly damaged the UN's credibility and effectiveness. Global challenges and the urgency for reform. As global challenges like climate change and cybersecurity grow, the UN's foundational purpose becomes increasingly important. Unfortunately, the likelihood of meaningful reform is low, mainly because any changes require the agreement of the Security Council's permanent members, who have little incentive to change a system that benefits them. If the UN were dissolved, many believe a new organization would need to be created to handle global issues, highlighting the ongoing need for a platform where countries can collaborate for peace and security. New proposals for global governance. Experts have suggested various ideas to improve global governance. One proposal is to form a new group called the Democratic Nations (DN), with a two-part legislative system to better represent countries with different populations and levels of influence. Another suggestion is to strengthen regional groups like the G20, which could address global problems more quickly and effectively than the UN, often hindered by bureaucracy. However, concerns exist about this approach. Smaller groups like the G20 do not represent all countries, particularly smaller or less powerful ones, undermining the idea of equal representation that the UN stands for. Strengthening regional groups might lead to a fragmented international system with overlapping rules and authorities, complicating global cooperation. Relying on smaller groups could weaken the broader international system, reducing the influence of smaller states in global decisions. Striking a balance between representation and effectiveness. While smaller groups might be more agile, they may not have the reach to address global issues like climate change or pandemics, requiring coordinated action from all countries. There is a concern that groups like the G20, driven by the interest of wealthy countries, might ignore the needs of poorer nations, exacerbating global inequalities. These points suggest that while more effective global governance is needed, it is also essential to ensure all countries have a say. The debate continues on how best to achieve this balance, aiming for a system that is more representative and capable of handling today's complex issues. Thank you for watching this video. We sincerely appreciate you joining us today. If our content resonated with you or sparked inspiration, please consider expressing your support by liking it and subscribing to stay connected with our community. Your support holds immense value for us. You can watch another video on our channel, which is now on the screen.